I take that back there, and I hope I don't hear animal noises the rest of the message. I'm going to invite you to remain seated for the reading of our gospel because, once again, it's a very long reading today. But if you'd like to follow along, it's on page 871 in your pew Bibles from John 9. And this is, as Janine and I were talking last night, perhaps one of the places where we see the most amount of snark and sarcasm in Scripture ever. So it's kind of a fun story and a bit of a frustrating story as well. Beginning with verse 1. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world." When he'd said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it's someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, and then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he'd been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind. We do not know how it is that now he sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He's of age. He'll speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, his parents said, "He's of age. Ask him." So for the second time they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciples, but we are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they'd driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we're not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains." Friends, this is the gospel of the Lord. There is a little bit of snark and sarcasm in there, a lot of frustration on behalf of the man born blind, who was then able to see and still had to answer for himself several times over. We are on the eve of perhaps the greatest season of the calendar year, baseball season. And I read recently a story about an umpire, speaking of folks whose vision is frequently questioned. This guy named Don was used to actually being heckled by fans, but he was invited to do an exhibition game at Coors Field in Denver. He was a minor league umpire. This was a big deal. And he got there and he was so frustrated because he couldn't find the umpire's locker room. After frantically searching underneath the stadium for quite a while, he finally found a very neatly lettered sign, "Dressing room, umpires only." And he was just about to push through to go in, and he noticed something interesting about the sign. Right below it, it said the same thing, but in Braille. Now, the funny thing about umpires is they need to make a decision based on lots of information they've just gathered, all of it, within hundredths of a second, and they're expected to be right. Giving grief to an umpire is almost too easy. I used to umpire T-ball, which I'm still not sure why we needed umpires for T-ball, but I do remember one game, there was an actual play at the plate in T-ball. I've forgotten if I called the runner out or safe, but I do remember that right afterwards, someone behind the backstop said, "Whoa, I'd sure love to see that one on instant replay." And I turned around and I said, "You don't have to. I got it right the first time." We make a lot of judgments based on what we see. But we also know that our vision is really only one way that we interpret the world. We see with more than just our eyes. We have a lot of filters that help us interpret the world for us. For example, I am a devout dog person. I look at cats very differently than cat people do. Not saying they're wrong, just different. As a Christian, I interpret the world much differently than, say, a Buddhist would. We know that two people can look at the exact same thing and each of them see something very different. This particular episode in Jesus' ministry very clearly demonstrates this. We have a man who was born blind, and everyone sees him differently. First, we have the disciples, who are in their early stages of studying with Jesus, and as they walk along, they notice this blind man, and he becomes for them an object lesson, an opportunity to learn more from Jesus. They see him, but they don't really see him. He's not so much a person as he is just a moral to the story. For them, his blindness is because of some sin, and so they just ask Jesus to clarify. "Hey, Jesus, why is this guy blind? Whose fault is it that he can't see? Why is it that he doesn't fit in with sort of normal society?" The guy's a study tool. He's not a person. But of course, Jesus sees him very differently. Jesus sees great potential in this man. He sees someone who is going to help others recognize the power of God, not just because he regains his sight. That alone would be tremendous witness to what God can do. But Jesus knows that this man isn't going to keep quiet about what happened. He knows that he's going to share this story over and over again, even to the people who might be enemies of Jesus. This is going to be somebody who is going to speak up. The man born blind helps others to see Jesus for who he is. He's more than an object lesson to Jesus. Jesus sees him as someone who's going to become a powerful witness to the power of God. Here's a human being who deserves to be treated with dignity and who is going to take a place among the faithful witnesses of God's kingdom. Well, as a result of his testimony, this man is brought to the Pharisees, who have an entirely different way of seeing the world. They see the world from the top, and they just as soon remain there by keeping quiet anybody who might oppose them. New teachings, new visions are not welcome among the Pharisees, and they see this healed blind man as an affront to their sense of order. Jesus healed on the Sabbath, and he did so by making mud, by kneading together spit and dirt. Both of those things are violations of the Sabbath. Both of them are prohibited. So rather than seeing the wonder of what has just happened, the miracle of God's power to do this new thing with this man who had been born blind, someone who had no hope before then, they see only a violation. They're offended by this. The way that it's always been done has been thrown off for the sake of this new thing. And rather than appreciate that new thing, they're hurt by it, and they take it personally, and they get angry. Now, caught in the middle of all of this are those folks who think they're on the sidelines, but they're not. They're actually very active participants in this story because there seems to be this collection of sort of confused and very curious onlookers who really don't know what to think about this whole deal. They're probably more like us than we'd like to acknowledge. They see the man who's had his sight restored, and they're amazed. They want to believe in Jesus. They clearly recognize the power of God within him, but then they're stopped short. Some of them make excuses. Some of them say, well, I've seen it, but I'm not sure that I believe it, or I'm not sure that I've seen what I think I've seen. Some of them are able to say, yes, that seems like what it's been, but it's hard for them to imagine something different. They just don't know where they're supposed to land on this. Even the man's own parents are afraid to testify that Jesus is the Messiah, well, because they're going to lose quite a bit of their social stake. So they'll be cast out of the synagogue if they say anything good about Jesus, even though they know, probably better than anybody else, just what a big deal this is, the magnitude of what Jesus has done here. The onlookers aren't sure what they're seeing. They're caught between believing what they've seen firsthand and what those in power say they should be seeing. They just don't know which filter to trust more, what they've seen or what they're told they're seeing. All the folks in this story are in pretty much the same boat. They all have kind of an obscured vision. They all have lenses and filters that are helping keep them from seeing the entire story. And then there is the one guy. Once the man clears the mud from his face, he sees a world that he's never seen before. It might have been a world familiar to him, filled with people and places that he'd known all of his life. But for the first time, he's actually seeing them. Can you imagine what that would be like? For the first time, to actually see those things that you have heard and smelled that have been described to you. Because he's not only just able to see, he's able to see clearly. Beyond the curiosity of the disciples, beyond the narrow focus of the Pharisees, beyond the confusion of the people around him, all he knows is this: once he was blind, now he can see, and Jesus is the one who restored his sight. Now, the exciting part of this story is that we've only just begun to see the new chapter in his life. Sadly, the story kind of shifts focus away from him just as he's beginning to explore his new world. I wonder what that adventure looked like for him. I can only imagine his excitement. But it's left for us to wonder, when have we been in the various places in this story? At different points in our faith lives, we've been the curious disciple. We've been, perhaps, maybe we don't want to acknowledge it, the legalistic Pharisee. We've been the confused onlooker, the one who is seeing something that God's doing and wondering, how do I make sense of this? Because it's changing my perspective on the world. When have you been in each of those various places? More importantly, what are your eyes ready to see for the first time? Which parts of God's kingdom are going to be new for you? My ongoing hope for God's people is that we will continue to pray for clearer and clearer sight. The kind of sight that lets us see the world with the same joy and wonder as the man who was born blind. This is a risky exercise, but I'm going to ask you, close your eyes. It's risky at 8:15, I know. Cover them, close them, do whatever you need to do. And I want you to think for just a minute about the wondrous things that are a part of our daily world. The magic of a handle that turns and lets clean drinking water fill a glass or wash our hands. The excitement of walking into a grocery store that's filled with all kinds of fresh fruits and vegetables and counters of meat and fresh bread, knowing that we have choices about what we're going to purchase and prepare and enjoy. Imagine the comfort of having a friend or a relative to call at a time when you're feeling confused or lonely, or when you have just some exciting news that you want to share, to know that someone else is going to be on the other end of that line. Picture and feel the comfort of closing the doors and windows against the wind on a cold, rainy night. Or the thrill of reading a book filled with great characters, or a powerful message, or incredible new ideas. Every person here has experienced at least one, some, many, maybe even all of those things. But we also know that there are people in this community and this world who do not. You can open your eyes, and even as you look around, there may be somebody in this room who fits that description. And folks, that's where our eyes need to focus. See, having sight like Jesus helps us to notice when people don't have those things, so that we can see how we can get our hands dirty to make a change. See, in this story, in addition to the wonder of God's power, we also have an excellent example. Jesus shows us how to notice something, how to do something, and how to change it. We can follow this example not as a means of earning salvation, that's already taken care of, but as a way of stepping forward toward God's kingdom. There is nothing more inspiring to me than seeing what happens when God's people get excited about making a difference in the world, excited about serving each other. For example, this spring, some of Trinity's 8th grade RE classes got to work. They took a look at their community and said, here's something we can do. And so, one class, for example, made blankets and put together sort of birthday baskets for kids who they knew were homeless, kids who they knew wouldn't have much of a birthday celebration. Another group collected books to take to the Crisis Resource Center so that families who are still just trying to come up with the basics would still have books for children to read. I love going through the elementary school, specifically Wilson, because that's where my kids go, and I see older kids reading with younger kids. I see folks who were part of Grandparents for Education helping out with math, with reading, with just being present for kids. And folks, none of these things are particularly difficult. They just take a little bit of vision, a little bit of looking to see a need, and then figuring out how to use the gifts we have to meet that need. It's not hard. It just takes a little bit of vision. Vision. You know, the kind with our eyes is good. It helps us get around. It keeps us from running into things. But folks, the kind of vision we have with our hearts, that's what brings us closer to God. That's what builds God's kingdom each and every day. Amen.